Some days define a generation by their glory, others by their scars. In the history of South Australia, there is a distinct line drawn in the sand of time. There is the world before January 26, 1966, and the terrifying silence that came after. It was the day the heat broke records. It was the day the ocean sparkled like diamonds. And it was the day that innocence simply ceased to exist. If you talk to anyone who lived in Adelaide during that summer, the first thing they will tell you about is the heat. It wasn't just hot, it was oppressive. It was the kind of heat that radiated off the asphalt, turning the suburbs into shimmering mirages. The mercury was climbing past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was thick, heavy, and still. It was a suffocating blanket that wrapped around the city of churches, trapping everyone inside their cool brick homes, or driving them to the only escape they knew, the water. I'm standing in Somerton Park. Today the trees offer some shade and the breeze is gentle, but I want you to close your eyes and strip all of that away. Imagine the air so dry it cracks your lips. Imagine the smell of melting tar and dried eucalyptus leaves. This neighborhood, right here, was the sanctuary of the middle class. It was a place of manicured lawns, open doors, and absolute trust. In 1966, fear was a foreign concept. It was something you read about in newspapers from overseas or saw in movies. It didn't live here. It didn't live on Harding Street. Behind me is number 109. To the casual observer, it's just another house in a quiet row. But for decades, this structure held more hope and ultimately more despair than perhaps any other home in Australia. This was the kingdom of Jim and Nancy Beaumont. Jim was a taxi driver, a hard-working man who spent long hours on the road to provide for his family. He was the rock. Nancy was the heart. She was the quintessential 1962 mother, devoted, protective, and deeply involved in every minute detail of her children's lives. They weren't rich, but they were rich in what mattered. They had 3 children who were the envy of the neighborhood. And to understand why this tragedy cut so deep, you have to understand who these children were. They weren't just names in a police file. Jane Narter Beaumont, 9 years old. Look at her eyes in this photo. There's a seriousness there, isn't there? Friends and family described her as an old soul. She wasn't just a big sister, she was a second mother. Nancy relied on Jane explicitly. Jane was the type of child who checked the clock before her parents did. She was fastidious, responsible, and most importantly for this investigation, she was painfully shy. Jane didn't talk to strangers. She didn't seek attention. She was content in her own little world, often with a book in hand, acting as the quiet guardian for her younger siblings. Then there was Arna, aged 7. If Jane was the anchor, Arna was the sail. She was vivacious, outgoing, the spark of energy in the trio. And finally, Grant, 4 years old. The baby, the cherished son, innocence personified. Together, they formed a tight, impenetrable unit. They moved as one. Where Jane went, the others followed. It's crucial to remember this dynamic. They weren't 3 separate targets wandering apart. They were a single entity. To take one, you had to trick them all. The morning of January 26 began with a routine that was deceptively normal. Jim Beaumont had left early. He was scheduled for a 3-day work trip to Snowtown. He kissed his sleeping children goodbye, not knowing that the silence of that morning would be the last peace he would ever know. As the sun climbed higher, the temperature inside the house began to rise. The heat was becoming unbearable. The children, full of holiday energy, started pleading with Nancy. They wanted the ocean. They wanted Glenelg. Now, put yourself in Nancy's shoes. It's a national holiday. It's sweltering hot. Your kids are good kids. They are responsible. They've made the trip before without incident. It's a straight shot, a simple 5-minute bus ride to a crowded, safe beach. Why would you say no? There was no reason to say no. In 1966, the concept that a predator could be hunting in the daylight was as alien as a spaceship landing on the front lawn. So, she said yes. That yes set the clock in motion. Nancy helped them pack. Towels, bathers, a book for Jane, and then the money. This detail has been debated for 60 years, but Nancy was clear. She handed Jane exactly 6 shillings and 6 pence, enough for the bus fare, enough for a meat pie and a drink, not a penny more, certainly not enough for a £1 note. It was 8:45 de la mañana. The bus rumbled to a halt right here. The doors folded open with a hiss. Nancy watched her 3 children climb the steps. Jane first, leading the way, holding the bag. Then Arna, then little Grant, scrambling up with his short legs. They found a seat. They waved through the window. Nancy waved back, and then the doors closed, the engine roared, and the bus pulled away. That moment, the closing of those doors marked the crossing of a threshold. They were leaving the private sanctuary of their mother's care and entering the public world. The journey itself is agonizingly short. It takes longer to describe it than to drive it. It's a straight line down Diagonal Road, less than 3 kilometers. 5 minutes, maybe 6 if you hit a red light. Think about that duration. 5 minutes. It's not enough time to miss someone. It's not enough time to worry. For Nancy, walking back to her empty house, the bus hadn't even reached its destination before she started her daily chores. She had no reason to feel a pit in her stomach. The proximity of the beach was part of the safety net. They were just right down the road. By 8:50 de la mañana, the bus pulled into Mosley Square, the heart of Glenelg. If you've never been here, imagine a carnival atmosphere mixed with a seaside resort. The smell of hot chips, sunscreen, and salt water, the sound of seagulls fighting for scraps, and the constant rhythmic crash of the Southern Ocean. It was alive. It was loud. The children got off the bus and didn't head straight for the waves. Instead, they walked over to Collie Reserve. It's a large grassy park that sits just back from the sand. This is an important distinction. They weren't isolated on some distant dune. They were in a park flanked by a bustling hotel on one side and the beach on the other. They were surrounded by thousands of people. Witnesses confirmed that they set up their spot right here on the lawn. They placed their towels down. Jane, ever the responsible one, likely organized their little camp. Arna and Grant probably ran straight for the sprinklers to cool off. It was a scene of perfect domesticity. 3 happy kids, unsupervised but behaving well, enjoying the freedom of a public holiday. But the tragedy of a crowd is that everyone is watching, but no one is truly seeing. You see 3 kids playing, and your brain fills in the gaps. You assume their parents are just out of frame, buying ice cream or reading a paper. The predator relies on this assumption. He hides in the blind spots of our social contract, and on that morning the blind spot was wide open. 10 o'clock came and went. The sun climbed higher, the shadows grew shorter, the heat intensified. For the first hour, everything was normal. They swam, they played, they dried off. But as the clock ticked toward once de la mañana, the dynamic shifted. Sometime between Diez and once de la mañana, the solitude of the Beaumont children was broken. They were approached, not by another child, not by a police officer, but by a man. A man who didn't belong in their world, yet somehow walked right into it without breaking stride. Tall, blonde, mid-30s, athletic build. To the casual observer, he looked like a surf lifesaver or just another dad on holiday. He didn't grab them, he didn't drag them screaming, he simply joined them. And in doing so, he began the most baffling chapter in Australian criminal history. 11 o'clock. The sun is now high in the sky. The heat is intensifying, driving more families to the cool relief of the Collie Reserve sprinklers. Jane, Arna, and Grant are there. Wet, happy, and alive. But they are no longer alone. Multiple witnesses placed the children right here at this hour. But they also saw something else. Or rather, someone else. A man, lying on the grass nearby, watching. At first, he was just an observer, a figure in the periphery. But then, he made his move. The description has haunted Australia for decades. A Caucasian male, mid-30s, tall, athletic build, tanned skin from the summer sun. His hair was fair, almost blonde, swept back from a high forehead. He was wearing navy blue swimming trunks. No shirt. Just a towel draped casually over his shoulder. He looked ordinary. He looked like any other dad on the beach. This is where the story shifts from a missing persons case to a psychological puzzle. Witnesses didn't see a struggle. They didn't see fear. They saw play. The man was seen tossing little Grant into the air. Grant was giggling. Arno was chasing them. And Jane, the shy, responsible Jane, was lying on the grass nearby, looking completely relaxed. I want you to pause and really think about that image. Jane Beaumont did not speak to strangers. Her mother was emphatic about this. She was a cautious child. Yet, here she was, lounging on the grass with a man she supposedly didn't know. A man who was physically handling her 4-year-old brother. How? How did he break down those barriers so quickly? Criminal psychologists call this grooming, but usually grooming takes days, weeks, or months. This man did it in minutes. Did he know them? Had he been watching the house in Somerton Park? Or was he just a master manipulator, a chameleon who knew exactly what to say to disarm a 9-year-old girl? I know your daddy. I'm a friend of your mom. The lies he could have told are endless. And what about the witnesses? Why didn't anyone intervene? Why didn't anyone say, hey, who are you? Because of the father illusion. When you see a man playing with kids, laughing, helping them dry off with a towel, your brain tells you that's their father. You don't see a predator, you see a parent. One witness, a 74-year-old woman sitting on a nearby bench, watched them for quite some time. She later told police she thought the man seemed very attentive to the children. She saw him helping them get dressed after their swim. He was shaking the sand off their clothes. It was intimate. It was domestic. It was the perfect disguise. Around 2 de la tarde, the playing stopped. The man and the children packed up their things. The witnesses assumed they were heading home for lunch. But they didn't go to the bus stop. Instead, they walked together, away from the beach, towards the shops on Jetty Road. And Jane, poor, responsible Jane, was about to make a purchase that would baffle investigators for the next 60 years. Jetty Road is the spine of Glenelg. It connects the beach to the city. It's always busy, always moving. At 2:15 de la tarde, Jane Beaumont walked into Wenzel's Bakery, which stood right near where I am now. She was alone. Arna and Grant were waiting outside, or perhaps back at the park. This moment inside the bakery is arguably the most critical piece of evidence we have, because what happened next didn't make sense. The shopkeeper knew the children well. They were regulars. So, he remembered this transaction vividly. Jane ordered meat pies and pasties, but that wasn't all. She also bought a large quantity of cakes. Now ask yourself, why? Nancy had given them enough coins for a simple lunch. Just a PA and a drink each. The amount of food Jane purchased was too much for 3 small children. It suggests they were buying lunch for a 4th person. But the food isn't the smoking gun. This is... When it came time to pay, Jane didn't count out the shillings and pence her mother gave her. Instead, she slapped a 1-pound note on the counter. In 1966, a 1-pound note was a significant amount of money for a 9-year-old to be carrying around. It's equivalent to maybe $20 or $30 today, but back then it was paper money. It was adult money. Nancy Beaumont was adamant. She stated on record multiple times, I did not give Jane a pound note. She gave them coins, silver coins. So, where did Jane get this note? She hadn't been home. She hadn't met any other relatives. There is only one logical explanation. The tall blonde man gave it to her. Go get us some lunch, sweetheart. This creates a terrifying picture of the dynamic. The man wasn't dragging them away. He was financing them. He was treating them. By giving Jane that money, he was buying more than just meat pies. He was buying complicity. He was making them feel special, grown up. It's a classic grooming tactic. He turned a kidnapping into a fun little errand. The shopkeeper noticed one more thing. The pies were hot. Normally, if you're taking food home, which was just a bus ride away, you might ask for them cold or lukewarm to heat up later. but Jane wanted them hot. This confirms they weren't planning to go home immediately. They were planning a picnic with their new friend. Jane walked out of that bakery at roughly 2:20 de la tarde. She headed back towards Cawley Reserve. Now, remember Nancy's rule, be home on the noon bus? That bus had already left. The 2 de la tarde deadline had passed. Jane, the responsible, punctual child, had missed her curfew. This was the first sign that the rules of their world had been broken. They went back to the park, back to the man, and presumably they ate those pies together. The last supper of innocence. If Nancy had arrived at the beach right then, she might have found them. But she didn't. She was at the bus stop in Somerton Park, waiting for a bus that would arrive empty. Back in Somerton Park, the anxiety was beginning to simmer. The 2 de la tarde bus had arrived empty. Nancy told herself they just missed it. It happened. They were having fun. She waited for the 2 de la tarde bus. It came, it went. No Jane, no Arna, no Grant. Now, the worry turned into a knot in her stomach. Jane was responsible. Missing one bus was an accident. Missing two was uncharacteristic. This is where the timeline fractures. And this is the detail that has kept detectives awake at night for 60 years. While Nancy was worrying, a local postman named Tom Patterson was making his rounds. He knew the Beaumont children well. He delivered mail to their house. He swore under oath that he saw the three of them walking right here on Jetty Road at approximately 3 de la tarde. Here is the problem. If the postman was right, the children were alive and free at 3 de la tarde. That's 3 hours after they missed their curfew. But the strangest part? Patterson said they were walking alone. No tall blonde man, no struggle. He said they were holding hands and laughing. They greeted him cheerfully. This testimony is a double-edged sword. If true, it means the abduction didn't happen at the beach. It means they were intercepted somewhere on this walk home. But if they were free at 3 de la tarde, why didn't they run? Why were they happy? Had the man promised to drive them the rest of the way? Or was the postman simply wrong about the time? Memory is a fragile thing. While the postman continued his rounds, Jim Beaumont arrived home early from his trip. He expected a noisy house. He found a terrified wife. Nancy explained the situation. The dose bus. The dose bus. Nothing. Jim didn't hesitate. He jumped back into his car. He drove the short distance to Glenelg, his heart pounding in his chest. Jim arrived here around 3:30 de la tarde or 4 de la tarde. He scanned the crowds. He ran to the Cawley Reserve. He checked the changing rooms. He was looking for three familiar faces. He was looking for a green swimsuit, a pink pair of shorts. But the beach was vast, and the sea was indifferent. He found nothing, no children. But more importantly, he found no trace of their belongings. The towels were gone. Jane's book was gone. The bag was gone. If they had simply wandered off to play or drowned, their stuff would still be on the grass where they left it. The fact that their belongings were missing meant only one thing. They had been taken. They had been moved. At 5:30 de la tarde, Jim walked into the Glenelg police station. The sun was setting. The era of innocence was officially over. That night, Nancy sat by the window, staring at the streetlights, praying to see three small figures walking up the driveway. She would keep staring out that window for the next 50 years. In every investigation, there is something called a foreign object. It's a piece of evidence that doesn't belong in the puzzle. If you force it, the picture breaks. In the Beaumont case, that foreign object is a crisp £1 note. Let's look at this forensically. Nancy Beaumont was a meticulous woman. She remembered giving Jane 6 shillings and 6 pence. That's loose change, coins. But the baker at Wenzel's was equally certain. He knew Jane. He stated she paid with a £1 note and received change. He had no reason to lie. This discrepancy is everything. It proves external interference. A stranger didn't just walk up and grab them. He invested in them. By giving Jane that note, he was testing her. Will you do this for me? It was a compliance test. And by accepting it, Jane, likely thinking she was being helpful unknowingly, crossed a line from stranger to provider. Now, let's talk about the food. This detail is often overlooked, but it tells us exactly what the kidnappers' plan was. Jane bought pasties and meat pies, and she asked for them hot, not cold, to take home. Hot to eat now. This destroys the theory that they were abducted while trying to get to the bus. You don't buy hot lunch if you're rushing to catch a ride home to mom's cooking. The quantity of food is also telling. It was too much for 3 small children who had likely already snacked. The implication is chillingly simple. They were buying lunch for the tall blonde man, too. Imagine that scene. A picnic. The predator eating bread broken by his victims. It suggests a level of comfort that is almost nauseating. He wasn't rushing. He was savoring the moment. This picnic buys him time. It keeps the children occupied. It keeps them happy. If a police officer had walked by, what would he have seen? A family lunch. The hot pie detail tells us that at 2:20 de la tarde, the children had absolutely no intention of going home. They had been convinced to stay. The grooming was complete. But there is another item that vanished that day. Something personal to Jane. Something that might have been the Trojan horse used to lure her in the first place. A book. But not just any book. Jane brought a bag with her that day. Inside were towels, swimming togs, and a book. We don't know for certain which title it was. Some say Little Women, others suggest 7 Little Australians. But the title matters less than the object itself. A book is a shield for a shy child. It's a way to be in public but remain private. Think about the tall blonde man again. He approaches 3 kids. If he just talks to them, Jane the shy protector might clam up. She might pull away. But if he asks about the book, "Oh, is that Little Women? My daughter loves that story." Suddenly, he's not a stranger. He's a reader. He's a father figure. The book was likely the bridge he used to cross the gap of trust. Here is the most baffling aspect of the crime scene, the clean sweep. Usually, in panicked abductions or accidental drownings, things are left behind. A towel, a shoe, a wrapper. But, at Collie Reserve, police found nothing. Absolutely zero physical evidence. No bag, no book, no half-eaten pie crusts. This suggests a terrifying level of control. It wasn't a snatch and grab, it was an orderly departure. He didn't just take the children, he made them pack up. "Come on, kids, grab your towels. Don't forget your book, Jane." He made them erase their own presence before leading them away. And where did they go? Witnesses gave conflicting reports, but one sighting stands out. A woman saw a man walking with 3 children towards the changing rooms around 2:15 de la tarde. She noticed something odd. The little boy, Grant, was lagging behind. The man stopped, turned around, and waited. He didn't yell. He didn't grab. He waited. It was patient. It was calculated. It mimicked parental behavior so perfectly that no one looked twice. Some theories suggest he took them here to change out of their wet swimmers. If true, it means he had their dry clothes. Or perhaps they walked away still wearing their bathers, carrying their clothes in Jane's bag. Either way, once they left the green grass of Collie Reserve, they stepped out of the sunlight and into the shadows. But there is one person who claimed to see the final act of this tragedy. Not at the beach, not on the road home, but right at the front door of a house nearby. A house owned by a wealthy, respected businessman. For decades, police searched the outback. They searched interstate. They looked for drifters and pedophiles passing through town. But what if the answer was right under their noses? Literally, just a few hundred meters from where the children were playing. Enter Harry Phipps, a wealthy local businessman, the gentleman of Glenelg. In 1966, money bought you silence. And Harry Phipps had plenty of money. He lived in a grand house on the corner of Augusta Street and Sussex Street. He didn't fit the profile of the tall blonde man. He was older, shorter, but theories suggest he didn't work alone, or perhaps the blonde man was a younger associate procuring victims for him. This theory exploded in 2003 with a book titled The Satin Man. It was written by Phipps' own son, Haydn. Hayden claimed that on that Australia day he saw 3 children in his backyard. He saw his father with them. He described the children perfectly: Jane, Arna, Grant. He claimed they looked confused but not terrified. Yet. But stories are just stories without physical evidence. Until we talk about the factory, Phipps owned a factory called Castaloy. 3 days after the disappearance, while the whole country was searching beaches and bushes, Phipps did something very strange. He ordered a large hole to be dug at his factory site. A pit. Those meters wide, those meters deep. Why dig a hole on a weekend? Why fill it in immediately after? Witnesses said he claimed he was building a waste pit, but he never used it for waste. In 2013 and again in 2018, police took this seriously. They brought in ground-penetrating radar. They excavated the site. The nation held its breath. We all thought, this is it, they're coming home. But they found nothing. Animal bones. Rubbish. But no human remains. Does this mean Phipps is innocent? Not necessarily. Soil disturbed 50 years ago is hard to read. Or perhaps he moved them. Or perhaps the hole was just a distraction. The tragedy of the Phipps lead is the timing. If police had knocked on his door in 1966, they might have found something, but they didn't. He was a respectable man. You didn't accuse men like Harry Phipps of taking children. Class and status acted as a shield, potentially protecting a monster while a family destroyed itself with grief. But even if Phipps is a dead end, there was one final cruel twist in this case. A twist that gave the parents false hope, only to crush them years later. A letter, supposedly written by Jane herself, arriving 2 years after they vanished. 2 years, that's how long Jim and Nancy had sat in silence. 2 years of false leads, psychics, and empty prayers. Then in 1968, an envelope arrived. It was postmarked from Dandenong, Victoria. Inside were 3 letters. One was addressed to Nancy. It was signed, Jane. Dear Mummy and Daddy, the man is treating us well. We are happy here. He says we can see you soon. The handwriting looked childish. The spelling mistakes seemed genuine. For the first time, police experts said, this looks real. Nancy Beaumont recognized the turn of phrase. She believed it was her daughter. Can you imagine the surge of adrenaline? After 2 years of mourning, her babies were alive. The letters contained instructions. The man was willing to hand the children back, but Jim had to drive to a specific location in New South Wales. He had to go alone. Jim drove. He drove with his heart in his throat. He arrived at the designated spot. He parked. He waited. He waited for hours. He scanned every passing car. He rehearsed what he would say to the man. He prepared his arms to hold Grant. But the road remained empty. No one came. No one ever came. Jim drove home alone, the empty back seat of his car mocking him. It was a crushing blow that broke something inside him permanently. For 24 years, the Beaumonts held on to those letters as proof of life. They thought maybe the kidnapper got scared. Maybe they were still out there. But in 1992, forensic technology finally caught up. Fingerprint analysis revealed the truth. The letters weren't written by Jane. They were written by a 41-year-old man who had never met the children. It was a hoax. A sick, twisted joke by a bored man seeking attention. He had played with the emotions of grieving parents for his own amusement. When police raided his home, they found no connection to the abduction. Just a sad, lonely man with a pen. He wasn't the kidnapper. He was just a thief of hope. This was the cruelest oddity of all. The letters didn't solve the case. They stalled it. They diverted resources. And they tortured Jim and Nancy for decades. After the hoax was revealed, the light in the Beaumont house dimmed a little more. They stopped talking to the press. They retreated behind their walls, waiting for an answer that to this day has never come. Can you hear that? That wall of sound? I'm here on a busy Saturday, trying to simulate the conditions of Australia Day 1966. And the first thing that strikes you is the sensory overload. The wind is howling off the ocean. The waves are crashing. Thousands of conversations are happening at once. It's a cacophony. In a police report, you read the words, "The beach was crowded." But standing here, you realize what that actually means. It means chaos. If a child cried out here, or if a man spoke firmly to them, would you hear it 5 meters away? Probably not. The ocean swallows everything. This environment is a predator's best friend because it offers isolation within a crowd. I'm lying exactly where Jane, Ardna, and Grant were sitting. Look at my line of sight. From down here, the world is a forest of legs and picnic baskets. I can't see the road clearly. I can't see the police station. And crucially, the people on the beach can't really see me. Kali Reserve is slightly elevated and set back. It's a transition zone. It's public, yes, but it feels separate. To my left was the Pier Hotel. Back in 66, people were drinking on the balconies, looking down. Surely, someone saw something. But that's the bystander effect. When there are 100 witnesses, everyone assumes someone else is watching. Oh, that dad is playing with his kids. That uncle is buying them lunch. The sheer number of people actually worked against the Beaumont Children. It created a false sense of security for them and a cloak of invisibility for the abductor. I want to trace the path to the changing rooms. Witnesses said they saw the man walking the children this way around 12 de la tarde. It's a walk of about maybe 150 meters. It takes less than 2 minutes, but in those 2 minutes they were exposed. They were walking in swimwear, vulnerable. What chills me is the body language described by witnesses. The man wasn't rushing them. He waited for Grant to catch up. Standing here, I realize how bold that is. He wasn't dragging them into a van in a dark alley. He was parading them through the busiest spot in South Australia. That speaks to a terrifying arrogance. He knew. He knew no one would challenge him. 60 years later, the faces change. But the dynamic is the same. We are all here together, but we are all in our own bubbles. Jane, Ardna, and Grant popped out of their bubble and were absorbed by a monster. And the world just kept swimming, kept sunbathing, kept laughing. Now, let's walk the route the postman claimed he saw them on. Let's see if it makes any sense physically. I'm leaving the beach now. I'm walking southeast, heading back towards Somerton Park. This is the route Tom Patterson, the postman, claimed he saw the children on at 13 de la tarde. He knew them well. He swore he saw them walking, holding hands, laughing. But as I start this walk, the first thing hitting me is the heat. Even today, it's uncomfortable. In 1966, it was over 40 degrees Celsius. It was a furnace. Here is the first logical problem. Why walk? Nancy gave them bus fare. Even if Jane spent the coins on food, she supposedly had change from the £1 note. Why would 3 exhausted kids, after 4 hours in the sun, choose to walk 13 kilometers home in blistering heat when they could catch a bus? Unless they had no money left? Or unless they were told to walk? And there is a massive time gap. Jane left the bakery at 20 de la tarde. The postman saw them at 13 de la tarde. That is a gap of nearly 3 hours. What were they doing? Walking 13 kilometers doesn't take 3 hours. It takes 45 minutes, maybe an hour for little legs. Where were they during that lost time? Were they in a house? Were they in a car? I'm standing at the exact spot of the sighting. Patterson said they were alone. No, tall blonde man. If this sighting is true, it changes everything. It means the abductor didn't take them at the beach. He might have lured them somewhere, held them for 2 hours, and then let them go? Or told them to walk home to meet him? It doesn't fit the profile. Predators don't typically release their victims only to re-abduct them blocks later. So, was the postman wrong? Memory experts suggest he might have been right about the who, but wrong about the when. It was a public holiday. Mail delivery times were different. Maybe he saw them in the morning, on their way to the beach. If he saw them at 10:30 de la mañana, everything makes sense. But Patterson went to his grave swearing it was the afternoon. He said he had already finished his morning round. Let's assume he was right. Let's assume they were walking home at 13 de la tarde. Look how close I am to their house. I can see the street corner. They were minutes away from safety, minutes away from Nancy opening the door. If they were snatched here at 3 de la tarde, then this wasn't a beach abduction. It was a neighborhood snatching. It means the predator followed them, stalked them along this long, hot road, and waited for the quietest moment to strike. But here is the final nail in the coffin for the 3 de la tarde theory. This road is a main artery. On Australia Day, it would have been busy with cars returning from the beach. Yet, not a single other person reported seeing them. Only the postman. 3 kids walking alone, holding a bag, holding towels, invisible to everyone except one man. It feels impossible. When the leads dry up and the years turn into decades, the nature of the investigation changes. You stop looking for 3 children walking down a road. You start looking for the earth to give up its secrets. You start looking for a grave. I'm standing near the site of the former Castelloy factory. This location is crucial because it was owned by Harry Phipps, the man whose son claimed to see the children in their backyard. In 2018, this unremarkable patch of dirt became the center of the universe for the Beaumont case. Ground-penetrating radar had detected an anomaly. An anomaly. That's a cold scientific word for something that shouldn't be there. It was a disturbed area of soil, roughly the size of a small grave. Consistent with the digging, Phipps allegedly ordered just days after the disappearance. Imagine the roller coaster for the parents, or by then just Jim since Nancy was frail. The police tell you, "We found a disturbed patch of earth. We are digging." For days, the excavators clawed at the ground. They sifted through every bucket of dirt by hand. They were looking for buttons, for teeth, for the metallic clasp of a swimming trunk. But the earth is cruel. The anomaly turned out to be nothing but animal bones and construction rubbish. No human remains. The media packed up, the police left, and the hole was filled back in. Once again, the Beaumont children were nowhere and everywhere. Standing here, you feel the weight of that disappointment. It's heavy. It hangs in the air like smog. But the factory isn't the only graveyard theory. Over the years, clairvoyants and tip-offs have pointed everywhere. The sand dunes, the storm drains. In 1966, they even pumped the water out of the Patawalonga boat haven. They searched the sewers. It was a subterranean manhunt. This creates a terrifying picture of their final moments. If they aren't in a house, and they aren't in the desert, are they underneath us? The clean sweep at the beach suggests the kidnapper was meticulous. He didn't panic. He had a plan for disposal. And a plan that has lasted 60 years suggests he had privacy. He had time. We have dug up factories, we have scanned backyards, we have drained lakes, and the result is always the same: silence. The killer is likely dead. Harry Phipps died in 2004. Bevan Spencer von Einem is in prison, taking his secrets to the grave. The witnesses are passing away one by one. We are fighting against time now, and time is winning. I'm back where we started. 109 Harding Street. For most of us, moving house is a part of life. We move for jobs, for space, for change. But Jim and Nancy Beaumont never moved, not for 50 years. They kept the same phone number. They kept the children's bedrooms exactly as they were left on that morning in 1966. Why? Because of a heartbreaking sliver of hope. What if they come back and don't know where we are? That hope was a prison. Nancy Beaumont passed away in 2019 at age 92. Jim followed her in 2023. They died without answers. They died without ever knowing who the tall blonde man was or where their babies were buried. It is, perhaps, the ultimate tragedy, not just the crime, but the lifetime of silence that followed. Standing here in the dark looking at the same ocean, you realize that the Beaumont children didn't just disappear. They took something with them. Before 1966, Australian parents told their kids, "Go out and play." After 1966, they said, "Stay where I can see you." This case birthed the concept of stranger danger in this country. It was the psychological turning point. The innocence of the post-war era didn't just fade away, it was stolen on this very beach. The police file remains open. The reward is still $1 million. But let's be realistic. The killer is likely dead. The witnesses are gone. What remains is the story, a cautionary tale etched into the national psyche. Jane, Arna, and Grant are frozen in time. They will never grow old. They are forever 9, 7, and 4, forever playing under the sprinklers. We may never find their bones. We may never know if it was Harry Phipps or some drifter passing through. But as long as we remember their names, they aren't completely gone. They remind us of a time when the world was softer, safer, and they remind us of why we hold our own children a little tighter today. Good night, Jane. Good night, Arna. Good night, Grant. And to everyone watching, stay safe. If Harry Phipps represented the hidden darkness of the upper class, our next suspect represents the pure, unadulterated evil of the streets. To understand this theory, we must leave the innocence of 1966 and fast forward to the late 1972 and early 82, a time when Adelaide lost its title as the City of Churches and earned a new, terrifying moniker, the City of Corpses. This is Bevan Spencer von Einem. In the pantheon of Australian monsters, he sits near the very top. He was a key figure in a group known simply as The Family, a ring of high-functioning pedophiles and murderers who preyed on young men in South Australia. He is currently serving life for the abduction and murder of Richard Kelvin in 1983. But for decades, detectives have asked one question. Was Richard Kelvin his last victim? Or was he just the latest in a line that stretched back to 1966? Let's look at the connection. Police informants, specifically a man known as Mr. B, told investigators that von Einem bragged about the Beaumont Children while in prison. He didn't just mention them, he gave details. He allegedly claimed that he took the 3 children from Glenelg Beach. He said he drove them to his apartment where he performed experimental surgery on them before they died. The surgery detail is sickening, but it is consistent with the modus operandi of the family. The victims found in the 82 had been surgically mutilated. It was their signature. If von Einem is telling the truth, it means the Beaumont Children weren't taken by a lonely man wanting a family. They were taken by a psychopath wanting lab rats. It shifts the motive from twisted affection to cold-blooded torture. Von Einem reportedly sketched maps for his cellmates. He pointed to areas in the Adelaide Hills, specifically near Maiponga, as the burial site. Police took this seriously enough to launch massive searches in those areas. But here is the catch. The devil is in the details. In 1966, Bevan Spencer von Einem was only roughly 21 years old. Witnesses at the beach described a man in his mid-30s, a man with a mature build. Von Einem was a young accountant at the time. He was stocky, not athletic. He doesn't quite fit the physical description. So is he lying? Is he just a sadist taking credit for a famous crime to boost his reputation in prison? It's possible. Serial killers are notorious liars. However, detectives have a counter theory. Von Einem didn't work alone. The family was a network. What if the tall blonde man on the beach wasn't von Einem, but an older associate, a mentor? What if von Einem was the driver, or the one who disposed of the bodies? This would explain why he knows the details but doesn't fit the description. Von Einem has been interviewed repeatedly. Every time he smiles, every time he says nothing actionable. He enjoys the game. He enjoys the power. Unlike Harry Phipps, who is dead and silent, von Einem is alive and silent. And as long as he breathes, there is a chance, however slim, that he holds the key to the location of Jane, Ardna, and Grant. By November 1966, the police investigation had hit a brick wall. The leads were dry. The public was angry. And when science fails, desperation turns to magic. Enter Gerard Croiset, a famous parapsychologist from the Netherlands. He was brought to Australia not by the police, but by a wealthy property tycoon looking for answers. It's hard to overstate the hysteria surrounding this man. He arrived like a rock star. The media ate it up. Every word he mumbled was treated like gospel. Croisset didn't visit the beach immediately. Instead, he claimed to have visions. He said the children were buried in a warehouse, specifically under fresh concrete. His vision was incredibly specific. He pinpointed a spot in a newly built warehouse. He said, "They are here. I feel them." Now imagine the pressure on the police. They were skeptical. They were men of evidence. But the public demand was deafening. "Dig," the people cried. "Dig it up." So, against their better judgment, the police brought in the jackhammers. This was the moment the investigation turned into a circus. The excavation was televised. The whole nation held its breath. Jim and Nancy were there, watching. Can you imagine the torture? Every time the drill hit something hard, their hearts must have stopped. They were waiting to see the clothes their children wore on that sunny morning. They dug. And they dug. And they found nothing. No bodies, no clothes, just dirt. Croisset changed his story. He said the bodies had been moved. Then he blamed interference. Then he simply left the country, leaving a shattered family and a massive bill behind him. It was a humiliating blow for the South Australian police and a cruel hoax for the parents. The Croisset affair did two things. First, it wasted valuable time and resources. While police were chasing ghosts in a warehouse, the real leads, like the eyewitnesses at the beach, were growing colder. Second, it hardened the public. The hope that had sustained Adelaide for months finally broke. People realized that there was no magic solution. The children weren't going to be found by a wizard from overseas. But the failure of the psychic didn't stop the search for external help. Years later, two detectives from Scotland Yard, the famed British police force, were flown in. They were cold, logical, and experienced. They took one look at the case files, one look at the initial investigation, and they shook their heads. They saw the cracks in the foundation immediately. When the dust settled from the psychic circus, reality set in. The South Australian police were out of their depth. They swallowed their pride and called for help from the best in the world. Enter Chief Inspector Viscount Kelly and Detective Superintendent Mervyn Silk from Scotland Yard. These were not magicians. They were cold, hard investigators. And what they found in the case files shocked them. In a modern abduction case, the first thing police do is lock down the grid. Roadblocks, checkpoints, you seal the exits. But on January 26, 1966, that didn't happen. By the time Jim Beaumont reported the children missing at 5:30 de la tarde, the abductor had a 5-hour head start. No roadblocks were set up on the major highways leading out of Adelaide. Scotland Yard pointed out a critical failure, the delay in treating it as a crime. For too long, the prevailing theory was that the children had simply wandered off or drowned. While officers were searching the water, the tall blonde man was driving away on dry land. He could have been halfway to Victoria before the first radio call went out. And then there was the crime scene. Or rather, the lack of one. Collie Reserve wasn't taped off immediately. Thousands of holiday makers continued to walk over the exact spot where the children played. If there were footprints, cigarette butts, or dropped items from the abductor, they were trampled into oblivion. The clean sweep might not have been just the killer's doing. It was also the result of a contaminated scene. The British detectives also criticized the handling of witness statements. Some witnesses were interviewed days, even weeks later. By then, memories had faded or been influenced by news reports. The descriptions of the tall blonde man varied wildly. Was he 35 or 45? Was his hair blonde or light brown? The composite sketch we rely on today is essentially a guess-a-blend of contradictory memories. It's easy to judge with hindsight. Remember, this was 1966. Forensic science was in its infancy, DNA profiling didn't exist, CCTV cameras weren't watching every corner. The police were good men, but they were prepared for petty theft and drunk drivers, not a sophisticated predator who planned his crime to perfection. Kelly and Silk eventually flew back to London empty-handed. Their final report was never made fully public, but the sentiment was clear. The chance to solve this case was lost in the first 24 hours. The trail hadn't just gone cold. It had been obliterated by the slow reaction of a society that couldn't believe such evil existed. So, here we are. After 60 years of searching, digging, and weeping, the investigation essentially boils down to a tale of two monsters. On one side, we have the gentleman. On the other, the predator. Both theories are compelling. Both are flawed. Let's weigh them one last time. The case for Harry Phipps is built on proximity. He lived right there. He didn't need a car to abduct them. He could have walked them to his door. His son's testimony places the children in his yard. The digging at his factory fits the timeline perfectly. If Phipps did it, it explains why the children disappeared so quickly without a trace. They were swallowed by the local landscape immediately. However, Phipps doesn't fit the physical description. He wasn't tall or blonde. For this to work, you have to believe he hired someone, a tall blonde man, to procure the children for him. It's a conspiracy theory, yes, but rich men have hidden dark secrets before. Then there is the case for von Einem. This is built on pathology. We know he abducted children. We know he tortured them. We know he bragged about the Beaumonts. His involvement explains the cruelty, the experimental surgery rumors, and the connection to a wider ring of pedophiles. It suggests the children were taken far away to the Adelaide Hills, which explains why no bodies were found at the beach. But again, the age doesn't fit. He was too young in 1966. And unlike Phipps, von Einem was a nobody back then. Would a 21-year-old accountant have the confidence to groom 3 children in public for hours? It's possible. But it feels disjointed. There is a third option. The option that keeps detectives awake at night. What if it was neither of them? What if the tall blonde man was just a drifter? A tourist passing through on Australia Day. He saw an opportunity, he took the children, he drove interstate, and he never offended again. Or maybe he did and we just never connected the dots. This is the stranger theory. And it is the most terrifying, because if it's true, his name isn't in any file. He lived his life, grew old, and died with his secret. He won, he beat the police, he beat the psychics, he beat the system. We can analyze evidence forever. But without a body, without a confession, these are just ghost stories we tell ourselves to try and make sense of the senseless. The investigation has run its course. Science has done all it can. Now, all that is left is the memory. When a crime remains unsolved, time doesn't heal, it freezes. For the rest of the world, January 26, 1966, became a date in a history book. But for the people living inside 109 Harding Street, the calendar never really turned. Jim and Nancy Beaumont made a decision early on, a decision that defined the rest of their lives. They would not move, they would not renovate, they would not hide. They turned their home into a lighthouse, keeping the flame burning for 3 ships that had vanished into the fog. Imagine living in a museum of your own grief. For over 50 years, Jim and Nancy stayed right here. Why? Because of a terrifying, irrational logic. If the children escape, they will come here first. If we leave, how will they find us? They kept the same phone number listed in the public directory for decades. Think about that. Every time the phone rang for 50 years, their hearts must have skipped a beat. Was it Jane? Was it a kidnapper? Or just a telemarketer? That specific kind of torture, the torture of perpetual hope, is perhaps crueler than grief itself. Reporters and friends who visited over the years whispered about the bedrooms. It is said that Nancy kept the children's rooms exactly as they were left. The beds were made. The clothes were folded. The toys were waiting. It wasn't hoarding. It was readiness. In her mind, Jane, Arna, and Grant were not dead. They were just away. And when they returned, they would need their pajamas. They would need their books. As the decades rolled on, Nancy grew frail. The neighborhood changed. Old friends died. But the sanctuary inside number 109 remained untouched, a shrine to a stolen morning. The tragedy is that their love, their dedication yielded nothing. The silence from the void was absolute. In September 2019, Nancy Beaumont passed away at the age of 92. She spent 53 years waiting, 53 years staring out that window. She died without knowing who took them. She died without a grave to visit. And then, it was just Jim, the father, the rock. He lived alone in that house for another 4 years, surrounded by the ghosts of what could have been. Jim Beaumont died in April 2023. With his passing, the direct link to the mystery was severed. The two people who cared the most, who suffered the most, are gone. There is a profound injustice in that. We watch crime movies and expect a resolution in the third act. We expect the detective to crack the case and bring closure to the family. But real life doesn't follow a script. Sometimes the bad guy gets away. Sometimes the heroes die brokenhearted. And sometimes a house full of love becomes a tomb of memories. Look around this playground. It's safe. It's fenced. And look at the parents. They are hovering. They are watching like hawks. Before 1966, this scene looked very different. Parents would be at home or reading a book on a bench 50 meters away. Children were expected to be independent explorers. But on January 26, 1966, the psyche of this nation snapped. The Beaumont case didn't just take 3 lives. It stole the childhood of every Australian kid that came after. Sociologists call it a watershed moment. The disappearance was so shocking because it happened in a safe space. The beach was supposed to be a sanctuary. The public holiday was supposed to be sacred. When Jane, Arna, and Grant vanished, every parent in Australia looked at their own children and thought, if it can happen to the Beaumonts, a good, responsible family, it can happen to anyone. Overnight, the free-range childhood was canceled. The school run was born. Parents stopped letting their kids walk to school. They started driving them to the gate and watching them walk through the doors. We often use the term stranger danger. It's a cliché now. But in the 60 Segundo, it was a revolutionary and terrifying concept. The idea that a friendly man offering sweets or a ride wasn't just being nice, he could be a monster. The Beaumont case was the boogeyman story that Australian parents used to scare their children into compliance. Don't wander off or you'll end up like the Beaumonts. It's a grim legacy, but it's undeniable. Some argue that we overreacted, that we became paranoid, that we wrapped our kids in cotton wool. But the fear was real. The predator who took them exploited the trust of a simpler time. He weaponized our own kindness against us. And because he was never caught, the fear never went away. It just evolved. It mutated from a fear of men on beaches to a fear of white vans, and now to a fear of online predators. But the root is the same. The realization that the world is not a playground. It's a hunting ground. This is the hidden cost of the crime. The loss of innocence isn't just a poetic phrase. It's a tangible shift in how we live, how we parent, and how we trust. The tall blonde man didn't just kill 3 children. He killed the Australian way of life. He forced a relaxed, open society to lock its doors and close its curtains. And 60 years later, those doors are still locked. I'm standing in Mosley Square just a few meters from where the children got off the bus. And here lies the only physical mark they left on this world. A small plaque, a drinking fountain, dedicated to Jane, Arna, and Grant. Every day, thousands of people walk past this. Children drink from it. Tourists take selfies next to it. Most don't even look at the names. Life, as it always does, has moved on. But for those of us who know the story, this isn't just a fountain. It's a tombstone for those who have no grave. It is the period at the end of a sentence that was cut short. 60 years. It's a lifetime. If Jane were alive today, she would be nearly 70. She would be a grandmother. Arna and Grant would have families, careers, wrinkles, and gray hair. But they were denied all of that. They were robbed of the mundane beauty of growing old. With the passing of Jim and Nancy, the vigil is officially over. The lights at 109 Harding Street are out. There is a comforting thought, if you believe in an afterlife, that perhaps the reunion Nancy prayed for finally happened. Not in this world, but in the next. Perhaps after 57 years of waiting, she finally got to hold Grant again. Perhaps Jim finally found his little girls. We have to hope so. Because the alternative that the silence is eternal is too heavy to bear. This case remains open on paper, but the reality is that the sand has run out of the hourglass. The witnesses are gone, the suspects are dead or dying, the physical evidence has turned to dust. We may never know if it was Harry Phipps in his mansion, or Von Einem in his car, or a stranger passing through. The who and the why may remain secrets of the universe forever. But the what remains clear. 3 innocent souls went to the beach on a sunny day and walked into the darkness. They belong to history now. They belong to the wind that blows off the Southern Ocean. They belong to the cautionary tales parents whisper to their children. Adelaide is no longer the city of corpses, nor is it the city of innocence. It is a city that remembers. And as long as this story is told, the Beaumont children are never truly lost. Thank you for walking this journey with me.